Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a session that I'm hosting on cash management in 2020. Some thoughts and reflections on that. So my name's Ben Walters. I'm Deputy Treasurer at Compass Group PLC. We're a listed business on FTSE. We are a very large catering company. My particular role at Compass is around the sort of group activities that Treasury performs for the group, such as debt capital market activity. I also manage the front office desk, so that's a daily cash management operation. I look after the hedging for interest rate and FX translation risk, monitor our liquidity, prepare sort of our ratios for credit rating agencies, and fully involved in discussions with those agencies, but also our group relationship banks. Handle a lot of the interaction with the auditors, as many of you will appreciate, going concern being absolutely top of the auditors lists at the moment. So that went from being not a very big part of a role to being quite a time-consuming part of a role. And I think it's fair to say that 2020 was an extremely busy year. So just to set some background to the business that I work in, which will frame the points I'd like to make in this presentation. As mentioned, Compass is the world's largest contract caterer. We operate in 45 countries and we employ over 500,000 people. We cater in all sorts of operations, such as business, so that'll be offices, industry, which will be factories and distribution centres, education, so that will range from schools to universities, healthcare, with the obvious places such as hospitals, but also senior living establishments now. We cater in lots of sports and leisure settings, so big stadiums and sporting events and that type of thing, such as Wimbledon. And then we also have a sector which covers offshore and remote, so that will be things like sort of oil rigs and mining camps, but also sort of defence camps, so you know, the British Army, for instance, at Sandhurst. So very diverse range of sectors, and as I'm sure many of you can imagine, some of those were hit extremely hard last year when coronavirus basically closed down large areas of the economy. So our revenue last year took a hit of about 20%, and operating profit by much more than that. But really it was a story of two halves for Compass. We have a September year end, so our half year runs up to March, and as you can imagine, up to March 2020 things were pretty good. You know, a lot of this, there was no dark clouds, as it were, on the horizon, and Compass was having a very good year. I think quite rapidly during that sort of latter half of February and early March, you know, the full extent of what coronavirus would do to the economy started to become apparent, and you can see that our second half of the year, which runs from April through to September, was severely impacted. So, you know, at various points, sort of April, May, the height of lockdown, we were operating at about 50% of our usual capacity. In those circumstances, the conversation starts to be about cash burn and the rate at which losses drop through to the bottom line rather than cash generation. So for a business that had been very successful for many years, this was new territory really for Treasury, for management, for our operators. But I'm pleased to say that I think we rose to these challenges, and this is what I'd like to talk about in the next couple of slides. So let's boil Treasury back to basics. we are there to make sure that our business has adequate headroom and liquidity at all times. And when you face a situation almost overnight where, you know, cash flow moves from a positive number to a negative number, that really comes into focus. So we in Treasury really took the lead at that point in time. I'm talking sort of middle of March last year in really taking responsibility for the scenario modelling, which became essential at that time to understand the full impact of what coronavirus would have on the business. So that concentrated on areas such as liquidity and headroom, looking out for the next sort of 18 to 24 months, the impact that the virus would have on our covenant ratios. We have US private placements with a leverage test, which is net debt to EBITDA, and an interest cover test, which is EBITDA cover over interest. So these were absolutely critical measures to get a grip on, and also, you know, the standard credit rating agency metrics similar to the USPP ones, but you know, what effect was the downturn in business going to have on those? We also at the time we accessed the Bank of England's COVID corporate financing facility. We were fortunate in that we have a commercial paper program, so it was pretty much a sort of an easy task to roll into that facility, and we drew down £600 million from that facility on the first day that it actually became live. We also updated our commercial paper and Euro medium-term note programs to increase the program size of those. Now that was really out of a sort of a to shore up, you know, potential headroom should we need to issue more than normal under those programs, in what was at the time obviously a very uncertain environment. So I guess, you know, the lessons that I would like to highlight to everyone really are about the value of relationships. You know, it's the work that you do when things are going well that really counts in a crisis. So, you know, those relationship meetings with the banks, which you know, sometimes can be a little bit sort of tedious, but they are very important to put that work in. You know, build those relationships, have a mutually trustful relationship. Credit rating agencies is, again, you know, this isn't rocket science, but it's about transparency and, you know, disclosure, and just building up that relationship of trust and integrity with them. The same applies to, you know, your legal advisors. We use one or two firms and have a good relationship with them, and your debt investors. You know, we talk regularly to them. We present in an open fashion, you know, the situation with the business, and these relationships that you build up during these times, they really count when, you know, things are much more stressful. There's pressure in the system. You know, we also, you know, as I'm sure many of you can confirm, we were at the heart of the action during this time, and it was very much a case of, you know, we had the ear of the board, the CEO, the CFO, you know, where the projections and scenarios we were looking at for headroom were absolutely a focus of discussion, and this was actually a refreshing situation for Treasury to be in, and you know, it just goes to show that actually, although sometimes we may feel that we sit there for long periods of time working in an extremely critical position, but not really at the forefront of people's minds, you know, at the heart of every business, the management of cash, liquidity, headroom is absolutely essential. So I think a bit of a boost there for all of us in the Treasury profession to understand that, the work that we do when it's sunny or when it's raining really counts. So just moving on to the next slide. I think one of the key messages I'd like to get across is the absolute value of forecasting and being able to do this in an agile manner with data that's relevant and direct. Now we had a forecasting process driven through our reporting system, which really, under the circumstances we found ourselves in last year, wasn't quite right for those circumstances. It was a full profit and loss balance sheet reforecasting effort from all of our businesses. Yes, there was a cash flow embedded within that, but this was very much a sort of a big exercise out of which a full pack of data came and a cash flow, a full statutory cash flow, really looking at where we thought we would end up at the year end. Now, what we found ourselves in March, April was a real need to know in real time what was happening out in the business, what people's cash flow expectations were over the next 3 or 4 months, but also critically to know that these were absolutely integrated with the profit forecasts, which were also being collected at the same time by our FP&A team. So over a weekend, we put our heads together and we came up with a much slimmer version of a forecast model, which literally could fit on one screen and would show some key profit and loss items and a direct linkage to the cash flow which would fall out of those. In particular, focus on working capital, and that's really getting into the detail of what did we expect to collect and what did we expect to pay on a month-by-month basis. So actually asking those direct questions of the AR and AP teams, and not leaving that working capital piece to some high-level assumptions around, say creditor days and receivable days. What we wanted people to think about was genuinely what is going to happen over the next few weeks and months to receivables and payables, and forecast those figures, which we would obviously use and be able to make sensible decisions about our overall liquidity position. So again, a bit of a change of mindset there, but what we managed to do in a very short space of time was build something simple but comprehensive, something that we could actually reforecast every week within, looking out over a rolling 12-month period, something which actually almost forced the business in a way to drill the forecast down into their accounts receivable and accounts payable teams. So this was an integrated forecast at the operational level, and its value to us as a business was absolutely immense. I mean, we managed to roll this new forecasting model out within 3 weeks. It was agile enough and simple enough for people to be able to update it regularly. We had variance analysis against the previous week's forecast, which showed us how people's expectations of the impact of the crisis were changing week on week, and that was a very important measure for us. And the value of this forecast was, as I say, immense. I mean, it helped internally with our planning around liquidity and headroom, and where some of our key credit rating and covenant metrics were headed. It helped assure our banks and our auditors that we were really fully in control of the situation. It allowed us to communicate externally to the market, as I say, we're a listed business, about what we were seeing in the business. So a really, really useful tool, which was driven by Treasury. And if I dare say, it was something that, had been on the agenda to try and push through in the business and get away from this big chunky forecasting exercise to something more agile. They say that a crisis can lead to an opportunity, and I think that was very much the case in this situation. And I'm pleased to say that now this new forecasting model is fully established as a regular monthly reporting tool. So we've cut the frequency down now. We used to be collecting this weekly. We now collect this monthly on a rolling 12-month period, and that's bedded in now and absolutely part of our overall reporting strategy. So if we move on to another area where the impact of the virus was immense, and that is cash management. So I mean, clearly there was at this time huge focus on monitoring actual cash flows, and as I mentioned, our new forecasting application really allowed us to look at the latest forecast versus the previous forecast. So that sort of change in expectation really allowed us to go back to the operations and say, well, you know, what are you actually seeing on the ground here? I think at first, there was an expectation that perhaps this whole crisis might blow over, within 3 or 4 months. But I think we can all appreciate that things have dragged on. It's taken an awful lot longer to blow through. I think, there obviously is light at the end of the tunnel, but, we keep shifting to the right, as it were. Particularly in a business like Compass, where, catering is all about interaction with people. There are some of our sectors have not really been affected, and some parts of the world have been affected less than others. But being able to actually really keep on top of cash flow has been critical to us. So again, it's these are simple things really at the end of the day, but that dialogue with our in-country cash managers is critical. A lot of our operations based in the US, and we have a very good dialogue with our US Treasury team. So it's understanding what the drivers are behind their cash flow forecasts. Just for an example, some of our business is very cash based, the sports and leisure side of things in particular, and that stopped overnight. So you see quite a sharp working capital impact there, as your sort of cash takings literally dropped down to virtually nothing overnight. But your payables, which you might pay sort of within 60 to 90 days, that cash outflow is still occurring over the next 2 or 3 months. So working capital and being able to forecast that correctly was one of the challenges and one of the key areas. So again, we were instrumental in rolling out some best practice guidance in terms of working capital management. And I'd like to refer back to the message in the forecasting tool, which was very much about getting the forecasting done by the teams who were collecting the cash or paying suppliers, and making sure that forecasting wasn't so much being done by the more sort of general finance people within an operation. We were actually lucky enough at the time to be running a working capital improvement project, to have very close links to 1 or 2 of our accounts receivables teams. So it really was, we were getting insight from the ground as to what was going on and what the thinking was in those teams about making sure that receivables collections continued in as unsort of disrupted manner as possible. For instance, a very simple step we took was to reassign staff to the receivables team. We have an internal audit team who obviously, when coronavirus struck, were unable to carry out their internal audit visits because travel virtually ceased overnight. So we reassigned some of this team to accounts receivables. We also put in place sort of a monitoring system, identifying clients in sectors that were worst hit by coronavirus. So that might be sectors such as aviation, travel, hospitality themselves. So that was important that we we identified those clients and made sure that the receivables that were coming through from those clients were very much in line with expectation, that there's a good dialogue with the accounts payable teams there to make sure that we were on the front foot, really, and that our dunning processes were operating in terms of best practice. We also, behind the scenes, put in place a sort of a pre-agreed early settlement discount that we could offer people if we felt that they were showing signs of distress or paying late. And in the end, that wasn't actually required, but that was a pre-agreed limit with our operational management, that should a business look like it was heading for trouble, we might be able to offer a reasonable discount to them in order to incentivize them to pay us the receivable due. The other area where we concentrated our efforts were to increase the uptake of our supply chain finance program. So that's onboarding suppliers and basically accelerate the process. It certainly wasn't the case that you were trying to make people join a program that they didn't want to. I think in the circumstances, an awful lot of suppliers appreciated the opportunity to be paid early. Clearly, everyone was worried about liquidity, and these supply chain programs, when they're pitched correctly, are win-wins for both the business that's operating the program and the supplier. So that was an important tool in our armory there to support our supply chain and also help with working capital impact. So again, the lessons are about building up really good, solid processes and a culture that you do things in the right manner, day in, day out, so that when the pressure is on, that your people, your teams, your technology is going to respond. It's not going to let you down, and you can rely on those teams to take the initiative to manage their own areas of responsibility very proactively, which is very much what we saw. And again, just another lesson, I think, the detail within the receivables operation, it was very important that we paid attention to those details, and I've listed some of the areas there, such as just moving staff over, monitoring clients that you felt might become under pressure, having those early settlement discounts in place. It's that kind of detail which really puts you in a good place to be able to handle the full impact of this. So I guess I'm going to summarise now, and it's really that Treasury were able to take the lead on 4 fronts, and I think it's a testament to us as a profession that and the training and the experience that we get through an association such as the ACT, that we were very much able to react to what was going on, which was quite unprecedented. So we were able to really take the lead across the business on scenario planning, and take the lead not just in terms of producing the numbers, but also in terms of best practice. So in a sense, whereas our FP&A team were very competent and very on top of the ball in terms of P&L, it's really that wider picture that your P&L and your cash flow and your headroom, your credit metrics and your covenants, they're all one of the same. And it's being able to build that into an integrated approach, and to be able to actually flex that between what you expect to, a downside and then an even harsher downside. And that's really where, it was a fascinating time, if I can use that phrase, to be involved, because this was stuff that we don't ordinarily do. Immensely valuable to the business at the time, with immense focus from the board downwards. So scenario planning was very much a key area where we took control. We also, it goes without saying, it was our responsibility to put in some extra liquidity. to shore up our headroom position. So, you know, that was the Bank of England CCF fund. We also organised a club deal with 5 of our relationship banks. And we also expanded the size of some of our programs just in case we would need to draw more than we normally do under commercial paper or issue debt into the capital markets. I think where I focus mainly on in this talk is the value of forecasting, and that being an agile and simple enough exercise for people to be able to concentrate and produce some quality numbers on, but at the same time provide the information that you need in a fully integrated fashion. I think to be able to integrate the P&L and the cash flow forecasts that were coming through in one place in our reporting system, so that you could interrogate that data and produce reports from it very easily, was an absolutely critical part of our response to the virus in terms of what finance did, what Treasury did. And again, lastly, I think looking at sort of best practice in terms of cash management and working capital, and I've talked about some of the things that we brought in to improve working capital management. It's about paying attention to detail, but it's also about getting the teams on the front line there fully involved in what's happening, and that gave us a really good view of working capital. And just, you know, just the outturn on working capital for us at the end of the day. And I'm not saying that Treasury now can take full responsibility for this, by the way, but when we looked in March and April and modelled what we thought might happen, to actually what did happen by the end of the year, our working capital performance was about 0.6 billion better than you know, we were first modelling back in March and April. Now you could say, oh, that's terrible modelling. In actual fact, what arose during the period were, you know, the effective government deferrals, extremely helpful, obviously, but because we'd concentrated on receivables and really drilled into the detail there, over half of our working capital performance outperformance compared to that initial reaction really was down to the steps that we took as a business to drill into the detail behind receivables and stay totally on top of that, and also the expansion and the bringing in of other suppliers into the supply chain finance program. So a lot of self-help there, alongside help from the government, really improved our cash performance. So my final thought on all of this, and I hope this is the message that you take away from this talk, is that the investment that you make in your culture and your process, your staff and your technology during the times when things are going well really does pay off when things are under pressure, and, you know, the business is not performing as you'd wish. And these were unprecedented times, but I think I'm pleased to say that throughout the organisation, that culture and the best practice that was embedded day to day really held us in good stead. It was one of the reasons why our cash performance last year was much better than initially thought, and why the external messaging we've been able to give to the market has been positive, how we've kept on top of what's happening in the operation, and generally probably rode out the crisis in as good a situation and strong a position as you could hope for in a business like Compass, which was so badly affected by the crisis. Thank you, everyone.